Hello, and welcome to this NJCU Center for the Arts digital event. Thank you, and enjoy the event.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Saturday series of Artist Process at NJCU. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Stephanie Chaiken. I'm the director of the Center for the Arts. And we have a wonderful program today with our alum, James Kelly, whose pen name is J.M. Kelly. And James graduated from NJCU in 1972. His accomplishments are amazing. He's been a middle school teacher, a vice principal, a principal, a co-director of the New Jersey State History Fair, consultant for the New Jersey Foundation for Educational Administration, current board member of the Global Learning Project, and past president of the Morris County Association of Elementary and Middle School Administrators. He's won countless awards. He's been awards such as the New Jersey Governor's Teacher Award, 2 Geraldine Dodge Foundation grants, and he received the New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association Principal of the Year Award for Visionary Leadership in 2007, which has all informed him in his creative process of writing. He's the author of 3 novels, all available on Amazon: The Lost Treasure, Monster on the Moors, and Tommy Ailes, Good for What Ails You. And he's also co-authored 2 nonfiction books, A Student-Centered Teaching for Increased Participation and In Search of Leadership. So we're so happy to have you here, James. Welcome. I would like to start off our afternoon by asking you, who is Bobby Holmes?
Well, first of all, Stephanie, I'd like to thank you very much for your warm welcome and your kind introduction, as well as the audience for tuning in on such a warm Saturday afternoon, and of course, my wonderful alma mater for hosting this author event. To answer your question about Bobby Holmes from England, along with his American cousin, Brenda Watson, and their 2 best mates, friends Stevie, who's very much a wise guy, and Michael, who is challenged with Asperger's syndrome, are all the central characters in my Bobby Holmes thriller horror series. Now, the first book in the series is my debut thriller entitled The Lost Treasure. The second is entitled Monster on the Moors, and I'm currently working on a third, tentatively called The Son of the Devil. In The Lost Treasure, these 4 adolescents band together to solve a deadly mystery, where the spirit of a long-dead pirate seeks his 300-year-old buried treasure through the possessed body of a diabolical descendant. In Monster on the Moors, Bobby and his mates reunite to solve a mystery involving a werewolf-like creature controlled by evil witches of British lore in the eerie landscape of the North York Moors National Park in England. Think of Stephen King's It, the movie The Goonies, and perhaps the series Stranger Things, and you'll get an idea what my characters are up to. Now, to give you a better flavor of what to expect in Monster on the Moors and from Bobby Holmes and Company, I'm going to read a brief passage from the book. When I'm finished, I'd like to focus on 2 very important things that any writer of creative fiction should consider. Now, you in the audience, as I'm reading, I'd like you to think about what those 2 things might be. You don't need to write them down. You don't need to send them in. I'd just like you to think about it. And at the other end, we'll discuss it. Now, just excuse me for a moment. This is a very brief passage. It's the first chapter of the book. And here we go. The wind stroked his matted fur, tugging at him with probing fingers as he raced across the dampened field. Burrs hitched a ride on his hindquarters while a flattened path of purple heather followed his trace over the wind-blown hilltop. Saliva careened down his chin and caressed his puffing cheeks. He was hungry, and he was on the hunt. He scurried down a gentle knoll where he paused, then sprinted up a small slope. His torn clothes snapped in the breeze, the only sound to be heard on this cool evening. He reached the crest of the ridge as the moon pierced the clouds, lighting the landscape before him. He gazed up for a moment, eyes wide in wonder. He tilted his head, eyes wide in wonder. He tilted his head back for a moment, bared his massive incisors, and let out a howl so terrifying no animal dared to answer it. The moon's glow bounced off his glistening eyes. He curled his clawed hands tightly, then slowly released them. He sniffed to pick up the rapidly vanishing scent he chased. He breathed in the sweat and fear that faintly lingered there, savoring its promise, turning his head to the left and sped toward the darkened forest below. The vegetation grew thicker here. There were heavily rooted trees of oak and ash, as well as fragrant thickets of pine and low brush. The air was thicker too, as the surrounding peaks cut the fast-moving wind to a crawl. The evening dew hung by a finger from the bending leaves and branches, falling quietly to the soft earth below. He stopped at a clearing. His prey was close. This would no longer be a hunt, it would be a slaughter. He heard the soft patter of rapidly moving footsteps to his right. His superior peripheral and night vision allowed him to catch a brief glimpse of the female he stalked as she fearfully scampered through the blackened forest. He snarled, saliva now flowing in anticipation of the imminent meal. He loped through the congested trees, his breath arriving split seconds before him in the chilled night air. He taunted his victim, growling his location every few feet. The head of the poor woman swiveled with each guttural sound, trying to pinpoint the location of her stalker, letting out an uncontrolled screech each time she heard him. She breathed rapidly and scuttled backwards, her darting eyes trying to anticipate the direction of the attack. Finally, she tripped and fell and pressed her back against a sturdy oak. It was time. The beast sauntered into the small clearing facing his prey. He stood there, still and silent, waiting for his quarry to notice him. When she did, the creature stood up on his hind legs to his full 7-foot height. He bared his fangs, unfurled his claws, and walked slowly towards her. Then he let out a vicious howl and pounced. Amidst the screams, the slashes, and the blood, he sank his razor-sharp teeth into her neck until quiet regained the forest and nothing could be heard but the crunching of bones. Now, as I mentioned previously, there were two things that I consider to be critically important to anyone engaged in creative writing that I wanted to focus on in that particular chapter. So hopefully you were thinking about that. And the first thing that I'd like to point out, especially because we'll come back to it a little bit later, is the opening sentence, the very first sentence of your novel. Now, editors, publishers, agents, other authors, everyone will tell you that your first sentence is critically important. It is your opportunity, your first opportunity really, to say to your readers, hey, this is exciting. I think you're going to like this, and I'd like you to come along for the ride. I'm going to mention that a little bit later again, but the second thing that I'd like to point out, and hopefully you were able to pick up on this as well, is that I wanted to set a tone or a mood for this particular story, and I wanted to set that right from the beginning. I wanted the reader to know that something bad happened here and more is yet to come. And you might notice that I haven't yet even mentioned Bobby Holmes and his friends. Now, one reviewer said of this section, and I quote, "Kelly establishes the story's malice with a sensational opening." Now, I'm glad, certainly, for my purposes, that they found it so. And I hope that if you get to read the entire novel, you will as well. Hopefully that gives you some sense of what Bobby Holmes is about and his mates and the adventures that they get involved with. And Stephanie, I believe you have some questions for me.
Unmute me. Okay, I'm muted. Was a frantic unmute me. That was amazing. Thank you so much for reading that. And I have got a million questions for you. Starting with, when you talk about format and the first part that's most important in your sentence, first of all, how do you get the inspiration, and then how do you put it into a format?
Where do I get my inspiration? That you could probably find a variety of answers, no matter what author you interview or talk to. But certainly, there are a number of life experiences that I would highlight that I would suggest have contributed greatly to my inspiration and how I write and what I write about. Teaching, for example, my chosen career has been, for me, a cauldron of creativity and imagination, enabling me to think of things differently. When you teach middle grade kids for 19 years, you are certainly, you need to feed off of their inspiration, and they were certainly inspiring to me. And as an administrator for a number of years, 16 years to be exact, I was certainly influenced by the creativity that surrounded me by the teaching staff that I worked with. So just being aware on my job has contributed greatly to my means of inspiration. Another life experience, and I know this might sound a little strange, is by dreaming. I have an overactive imagination. I pick up on things all day long, and it replays at night in such a way that you can, if you stretch that a bit, might call that creative. I like to write those things down occasionally, but if any of you do that sort of thing, you probably find the same thing, which is what sounds great at 2 o'clock in the morning. When you look at it again at 8 o'clock in the morning, you wonder what person snuck up and wrote something crazy on the paper that you have there.
And do you usually like it? Like, if you look at it in the morning, is it good, or do you exit out typically?
No, it's garbage.
Garbage. Oh, okay.
Usually garbage. However, there are snippets. I can get a piece of it, or in some cases, almost a full idea for a novel. And I'll then copy that down in my notes and squirrel it away and save it for another day. Another life experience that I'd highlight for me is travel. I travel extensively, and I look for inspiration wherever I do. Bobby Holmes in Monster on the Moors, for example, the novel I just read from, takes place in the North York moors of England, a very strange landscape, very different kind of landscape. I've always been fascinated by it, certainly by other novels, other books that have used that as inspiration, that place as inspiration. Bram Stoker's Dracula, for example, The Hound of the Baskervilles. It's just a very beautiful part of the world. And at one point, my wife had a business meeting in London, and I joined her, and we took the 2-hour train ride north to the North York moors, and we spent a few days in a small country inn, and then traveled the area and really soaked up the atmosphere. It was quite impressive.
Oh,
I will say, however, and I think anyone that has any thoughts of creative writing, you don't have to hop on a plane and go somewhere. We lived down the Jersey Shore, and we went up to the beach one day last week, and it was very foggy. The beach was empty and very moody. And just sitting there looking at that, which is a 5-minute travel time from here, I came up with an idea for a new novel, and quickly put that in my notes, and I'll be working on that sometime in the future, I hope. So travel is a a means by which I kind of fire up my imagination and hopefully get some creative ideas from that. Another life experience, and the reason I mentioned, I'll give you the reason at the end here, but I had an accident a number of years ago where I was body surfing at the Jersey Shore, and I wound up with a spinal cord injury and nearly drowned. And that I was a very young man at the time. I was 37 years old. The reason I mention it is because it leads to a main point, something I hold on to with great fervor, an idea that perseverance is a key quality to writing. And I look at what happened when I was 37, and a good many of the both professional and life experiences that have happened since then, the most important things in my career and life have happened since then, from becoming an administrator to being able to open up a new school in a high-performing district, to many of the things that you read off my introduction, and certainly to getting the Principal of the Year award and becoming an author. All of these things happened after something that could have very well derailed my life. And I point to that only to illustrate that a sense of perseverance, not giving up, is something that a writer has to hold on to and understand. Your first draft will not be your last draft. You will add characters, you will change dialogue, you will write and rewrite and sometimes eliminate whole sections because you need to do it, because it calls for you to do it. And I know this sounds a little strange, but your characters demand it. Right. So when you spend that kind of attention to your writing, you really have to have a sense of, I got to stick with this.
It's amazing. And you're bringing up another point that other authors have told me not to censor as you're writing, like get it all down and then go back. I think that's a hard one to how do you?
It is a hard one.
Stop yourself from. Especially
when I was taught, you don't make mistakes. So, you correct them quickly. That's a very difficult thing to focus on. But I'm going to cover this a little bit later in some of the information that I talk about with some slide presentation. But you're absolutely right. That's a very difficult discipline to ignore while you're writing. But it is important to get your thoughts out.
Awesome. Okay, and then on that vein, we just said the word discipline. So discipline on a good sense, how can we use discipline in whatever, making yourself sit down each day, or how do you use discipline to your advantage?
I am probably a very undisciplined writer, and I view that both as a benefit and a fault. Interestingly, in this time, the challenges that we have societally with COVID and the like, I think we get very well distracted, and it's very hard to maintain a schedule, even though we are all home and we are all we should have plenty of time to do the things that we value the most. But it's difficult, and I've read different blogs and different articles from authors that say just that. Authors that are on the New York Times bestseller list, they're lost. It's difficult to focus on what they need to do in order to get the next chapter done, the next novel done, and so on. So discipline comes into play, certainly. I mean, you really have to sit down and do the work. But it's hard to put yourself into the kind of a routine that perhaps you should.
And what happens if when you get stuck?
Yeah, good question. You try to stimulate your imagination. You try to, what I do is I'll take time out and I'll just take time out. I'll go up to the beach. I'll go on my porch and I'll read. And I'll read the kind of books that I like to read that give me that kind of inspiration, that get the juices flowing. And if I'm not writing, it helps to think about it. It helps to think things through and focus on the characters and the characterization and the plot and so on, and just let your mind flow. So to get unstuck, that's what I do. And I was stuck, to be honest, for a while on the sequel, the third novel in this series, which I have placed in New Zealand. Because I have traveled there, and that's another spot that I love dearly, and was very an aspect of a creativity that I could tap into. But to get unstuck with that, I just let it go and walked away from it. Sometimes you have to do that. You just have to leave what you're doing or the focus that you'd like to spend on it, and just walk away and let things flow and see how they can call you back.
And trust that it'll come back. It's a confidence in yourself too, right? I mean, that you will figure it out.
That's correct. There's a certain amount of confidence that you'll get there. And also, what I found through doing the first few novels, it kind of boils down to how I write. When I sat down with The Lost Treasure, the first novel in the series, and I tried to figure out, well, who are the main characters and where are they going to go? What's going to happen here? What's the plot? I read somewhere that, well, maybe I should have a storyboard and I should put up different bits of information that will help me pull this all together. Wow, did I get lost? So what I decided to do was just push all that aside and sit down, start at the beginning, and let it flow. Let's see where this is going to go. And I remember reading in a book by Stephen King called On Writing, where he talks about the craft of writing. And one of the things that he says or said in that book was, let the characters take you where they want you to go. And I thought, wow, that is just a crazy thought. How do you let the characters take you where they want to go when you're the puppeteer, you're pulling the strings, you're the one that's supposed to be directing this show? And but I followed that advice, and I found it to be accurate. Where I thought the storyline was going, the characters were almost telling me, no, you need to go in this direction. This needs to happen. Or one of the characters, Stevie, who's very much a wise guy, said something that put you off in a whole different direction, and it just happened. So I found that to be a very fascinating aspect of the writing process.
That's amazing. Thank you. So will you teach us some elements of great creative writing? I think people would like to kind of try their hand at it, so get a taste of some strong elements first.
Well, first of all, I believe everybody's a writer, and everybody should be a writer, and especially kids when they are at the age of everything is fascinating, everything is interesting, everything sparks their imagination. They really need to tap into that. And I would also emphasize that I am not a college professor, and this is not a college course in creative writing. So please let me put that caveat out front. And probably any middle school kids out there would probably be better served by any public school teacher who has been taught how to teach kids to write today, because they're so much better at it than when I was growing up. So this is probably redundant for some people, but I do think as an author that there are a number of factors that anyone who wants to engage with creative writing should consider. And three brief slides to emphasize. So if we can put the first slide up. Okay, this is obviously on plot, and that's your story, right? This is from start to beginning. It's what happens in your story. It's the tale you want to tell, the saga you want to share with people. So how do we do that? The problem is that anybody can tell a story, and you can probably do so in 3 to 6 words. For example, if I were to say to you, an evil witch wants ruby slippers, what pops into your head? Well, I think culturally, you must have seen this movie a bazillion times, and certainly many people have read the book. But The Wizard of Oz pops into your head, and you get that with just about 6 words. So that's a story, but it makes for a lousy book. So how do you flesh that out? What do you do to make that something that stretches from an idea into an actual novel? Well, one of the things you need to focus on, obviously, are your main characters. Who are they? It could be one person, could be a handful of people. And what do they want? And what do they want becomes an interesting question, because what they want can be small or large. It could be something that they want immediately, or it could be something that takes time for them to get. It could be something that's very personal, or it could be something that they want for others. So you need to be somewhat clear about that, and it can change. Their needs and wants can change throughout a story because they evolve as your story progresses. But you need to be clear about that. They need to want something. You need an antagonist. An antagonist can be a person, a creature, an idea, but it's something that is designed to put a stop to what your main characters want. And why you have this, or why that's important, is because it creates the third element, which is tension. And to me, that is an absolutely key component to any story, especially a thriller novel or a horror novel. Your tension needs to build. I like to start off with a slow boil, and then each chapter adds something that makes your reader want to turn the page. That tension, that energy between your main characters and their antagonist is what creates your storyline and gets, as I mentioned, gets your reader to want to turn the page. So all of that's critically important. And of course, your climax. This is what happens at the end. You tie up your loose ends. This is where, and you have to make sure to do that. And I'll give you a key example of that. When I say what happens at the end, and you need to address anything that you mentioned that's a question during your story. In Monster on the Moors, Bobby Holmes arrives with his mother in the town of York. They walk through a tunnel which goes underneath the train station. They come up on the other side, and then they move on. But in that tunnel, which, by the way, I've been in and was able to describe, there's a beggar sitting in the dark that grabs his leg and issues him a warning. Now, at that particular point in the story, I don't know who he is. I don't know what he wants. I don't know where he came from or where he's going. But after that scene, I know that I have to explain who this person is, or the reader's going to want my head. They're going to say, well, wait a minute. You mentioned this character in the very beginning of your story, but what happened to him? Later in the story, they're in the town of Whitby, which is a fascinating sea town in that area. And once again, he's confronted by this beggar who gives him a warning and then escapes, and Bobby can't find him. Again, fascinating character. There's something going on here. but I still don't know. As the writer, I don't know who he is and where he's going. And how do I explain this to the reader? In the third segment of the book, it became crystal clear to me. And he plays a very fascinating role that helps Bobby and his friends. And I was very glad I got to that point, because I knew as the writer, I had to tie this all together by the time the climax of the novel is reached.
And have you ever had a situation where you went down a path, you got to the end and just something's not right, and then it doesn't tie up, and then if you change that, then everything changes and you start over? Or
Good question. Yes and no. I never had to start over with the entire novel, but what I did have to do is, in 2 novels, start at a different beginning. Through the editing process and working with an editor, 2 professional editors, in fact, and they both said the same thing, so I had to pay attention. They thought these novels were starting in the wrong place, that they were good, but they needed to start somewhere else. So I had to actually eliminate an entire chapter and restart the novel with a different kind of a twist to it. So.
And how do you not take it, because I'm not a literary writer, a songwriter, but it's hard for me a lot of times to not take the criticism personally and to be able to see what's really real and what's, you just want to go off in your corner.
Yes, there are a couple, exactly. And there are a couple of points to make there. One is, you do take it personally. Yes, it does hurt. Stephen King actually called it, "These are your babies. You created these." And it really hurts to take a pen, obviously not on a computer, but to eliminate certain phrases, certain characters, certain scenes, because you as the writer this comes out of your creativity, and you want this to stay, but the editor says, no, you need to slice that needs to go, because your story will read much better. So you have to have some faith in that, and certainly the people that you have look at it. If it was just your neighbor that you gave the manuscript to, it's one thing, but if you give it to a professional editor and they say, here's why, you have to pay some attention to that. Now, on the other hand, there may be a phrase or a segment or a scene where you might say to your editor, well, wait a minute, I really like that. Does that really have to go? And here's why I like it. And if you can make your case, they usually will say, okay, I see your point. So yeah, you can leave that. That makes sense.
If you can defend it accurately, then.
Now, when I was a young writer and trying to figure this all out, I thought, well, if the editor tells me I need to do that, then I need to do that. They know better than I do. But you come to have a little more confidence in yourself as a writer, and you can then say, then you can make your argument.
Got it. And how do you build the confidence? Is just writing a lot, or putting yourself out there and having more experiences? How does that build?
All of what you said, and certainly by reading other authors and seeing how they write, and getting a sense of what's important to them and how they build their story, and making sure that you do the same. And as you mentioned, writing. I think I'm a better writer now than when I began, and I think that was a pretty good story. The Lost Treasure, I think, was an excellent story. But I think I'm a better writer now, and it's just it's like an athlete who practices and practices and gets better and better at what they do. It's the same with writing. The more you do it, the better you get at it, and the more confidence you have.
Awesome. Cool.
So, okay, let's move on to the next slide. Slide number 2.
I can see it coming.
Coming up. There we go. Character. You want to build your characters. And the reason I say that is you want your readers to come away from a story feeling that they know these characters. They have almost a personal relationship with them. So as a writer, you have to make it easy for your readers to do that, even though it's not an easy thing to do. And how you do that is, for example, by giving them traits and skills, both good and bad. Letting people know who they are by the kinds of characteristics that they exhibit. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they both? Like my character Stevie, for example, and I keep bringing him up because he's a favorite character of mine. He exhibits elements of courage and heroism that we'd all like to have. But he gets a little full of himself because of that, and he puts people in danger, including himself, and also does some pretty stupid things and says things that are offensive and has to be corrected. So if you make your characters a little complex and give them characteristics and traits and skills that are both good and bad, that's very helpful. And you put them into situations where they perform memorable acts so they can show off their talents and skills. For example, my one character, Michael, who wrestles with the challenges of Asperger's syndrome. His mother, in the initial story, The Lost Treasure, teaches him that when he wants to speak, because he has trouble communicating, when he wants to speak, he should hold up his index finger like so. And it's used to comedic effect in that story at times when everybody starts looking at the ceiling, like, what's he pointing at? But he gets to get his message across, which is often helpful. And he actually becomes quite a hero in that story. But that's a characteristic that you'll recognize is him. This is how he needs to communicate, and this is what he does, and it becomes a trait that sticks with him. I actually had one reviewer comment that they found that to be endearing of that character, and was something that they found of great value.
I have a question about, as you're in life and you're seeing people that are characters and true to life, and then you put it into your writing, how much do you change it from the real person, or what's the line that you would walk there?
Well, I've had the benefit of many years of experience of working with kids and adults that exhibit certain characteristics. And I would say probably that, and that helped me to think in terms of my characters and how they develop and what characteristics and traits they have and so on. It's usually an amalgam of characteristics. It's something that I've noticed in several people, and it becomes a characteristic or a trait for this character.
Awesome.
So I found that to be pretty helpful. Another means of building character is through dialogue. And I think that my editors hammered me with that, and I had to go back, and talking about rewriting, go back and look at certain scenes and create, instead of telling people what's going on here, create some dialogue between some individuals in order to expose that.
So it's kind of slowing it down in a way.
Slowing it down in a way and giving it a more personal touch with your characters and letting them take charge of actually what's transpiring here.
Right.
The meme that I put with this particular slide, I think everyone would recognize, is The Simpsons. And if you stop and think about it, those characters have very specific traits and skills that you see quite frequently. Lisa, for example, is walking around with her saxophone. Bart has his skateboard. And don't get me started on Homer. But they're very easily recognizable, and people will know them by how they speak to each other, how they speak to adults around them. They have a very specific pattern of speech and dialogue that they use, and the characteristics that they exhibit. So it's easy to do that. It's easy to recognize. And that's what you want to do with your characters.
And then that would go back to what you said, that let the characters take you where the story where it's going to go, because if you start thinking in their dialogue, it's going to take you somewhere, right?
Yep, that's correct. Okay, slide number 3. And setting. Another important consideration for anyone who wants to engage in creative writing, because this is an opportunity to take your reader to a place and have them feel comfortable there, or at least be able to feel their surrounding, to know it. And you as an author have to make sure that they do know it. You can't just say, well, they're in town. Well, what kind of town is it? How do you get them to get a sense of where they've landed here and how they can interact with their surrounding? This is, of course, time and place, when and where. Those are questions that you want to answer while you're focusing on this. In The Lost Treasure, the town of Mountain Lake, Connecticut, is a town that I created. It's fictional. The area is not fictional where I placed it, but the town itself is fictional. And it's based on a number of communities that I'm familiar with here in New Jersey. So I put those characteristics together in my head and came up with this fictional place. So I want people to understand, my readers to understand, well, what kind of a town is this, where my characters are placed? And it takes some time and effort in order to make sure that they do. Same thing with Monster on the Moors. The chances are my readers aren't all going to hop on a plane and go to the North York Moors of England. So it's my job as the writer to make sure that they mentally can do that, that by reading pages in my book, they get a sense, hey, I'm here, I'm in this place, and this is what it looks like, this is what it feels like. And the second bullet point there, adjectives, they are your friend. This is what you need to do, is use as many adjectives as you can to describe your surroundings. And it certainly helps you with, or helps your reader with understanding your particular setting. And some of the things to consider while you're trying to get a sense of setting are weather, landscape, as I mentioned to you earlier about the walking up to the beach and the fog, and that weather, that surrounding coolness in the air, and the vacancy of the beach. You've got to have to have a way to communicate that to your readers and have them understand it. Is it a happy place? Is it somber? Is it loud or quiet? Is it bright or dark, foggy, for example? Attention to those details adds a great deal to your storyline, and you really need to pay close attention to that. The meme for this particular posting, I don't know if you recognize it, but it's from the movie The Shining, which was a Stephen King novel. One of my favorite horror novels, by the way, and loved that book. Wasn't crazy about the movie, but loved the book. Probably a superb example of setting. Here's this guy with his family. There becomes the caretaker for this huge hotel up in the mountains of Colorado, and there's no one there. They're snowed in. It's just them and all of the ghosts that come to fore in that story. So it's a great example of setting. And if you haven't read it, I'd highly recommend that.
So when you are using when you're using adjectives, do you think of every single sense, the 5 senses, and then try and describe a situation from each of those senses, or do you lean? Personally, I lean kind of auditorily. Do you think that maybe your readers, how are each person going to take something in, and you consciously go to describe it from all the different senses, or is that automatic?
I think you have to be more focused on your setting than how you yourself might perceive things. And again, the answer is, and I hate to be nebulous about it, but it's a yes and no. Depends on the setting, depends on what it is you're trying to get people to experience. And you might, I think about that, but you might not emphasize that at that particular moment. But I think the more opportunities that you do so, the richer your story, the more depth that you put into it, and the more valuable it will be to your readers.
Awesome.
I think now we've got an opportunity to get some audience participation. So I will lead into that. And if you remember earlier, I gave you an example of The Wizard of Oz, using about 6 words to describe what that novel is, or that story is. Let me give you just a couple more to stimulate your imagination, give you something to think about, and then we'll ask you to do something with that. So just listen for the moment. Again, I will give you a brief description of a story and think for a moment, well, what story is that? And then I'll tell you. Frog DNA ruins billionaire's theme park. Okay, think about that. I'll repeat it. Frog DNA ruins billionaire's theme park. Not a tough one. If you were thinking of Jurassic Park, you got that obviously correct. But that's the story in a nutshell. Another one that might be a little bit of a challenge. Short guy destroys evil jewelry. Again, short guy destroys evil jewelry. Now, if you think about that, and you came up with Lord of the Rings, you were right on that score. But you get the idea. Short description describes a particular book. What I'd like you to do as an audience is to think of a story that is your story. We've all at some point, I think, have said, geez, I'd like to write a book about that. Or I've got a story floating around my head, and someday I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write a book and turn it into a novel. Well, I'd like you to deep dive a little bit, dig deep into the recesses of your imagination, and come up with something that you've been kicking around, perhaps. It could be any genre, any setting, and describe your story, if you can, in 6 words or less. If you have 7 words, I'm not going to hold it against you, but think about that. 6 words or less, try to come up with that. And
we'll have people put it in the chat.
And we'll put that, type your answers into the chat, and consider this. I wouldn't ask you to do something if I didn't provide you a reward for doing so. We're going to look these over. I'll comment on them as you're putting them up, but I will take some time over the weekend to look them over, and I will select one and send that person a signed, autographed hard copy of Monster on the Moors. So let's do that, get that underway, and see what kind of creativity we have in the audience.
In order to get your signed copy, please put your email in the chat along with your answer.
Okay, and will I see these?
Yes, when you click on chat, you will.
Okay. Okay, we've got one up here so far. That looks good. I like it. All right, we've got some creativity out there. Let's keep it up. Can we have a few more? This is a bit of a challenge because it's a personal response to a difficult question. I like this person's short description here. It's the kind of thing that we're looking for. If we can get a few more, and we are, here we go. Yes, it is. Okay, very good. Another good one. We've got some great ones here. We'll give you a few minutes. I know patience is a virtue. Here we go. A couple of more coming up.
Those good ones.
Yes. Some really good ones that leave you wanting more, and that's what you want from your description. You want something that's going to lead you someplace and take us along with you. Waiting can be difficult, but it is often critical. So take your time, think about it. We've only had a few minutes elapse. And again, don't forget to include your email if you wish to be considered for the book.
These are awesome. People have written great things.
Now there's one that I can relate to. Again, use your email. Happy to consider that. Stephanie, how are we doing on time?
We're good. We've got time. We can give a few more minutes, or you can start working with someone, and then more people can type in as they get inspired also.
If I may, we had a couple of people join us during the exercise. So if you would just real quick review what the exercise is.
Sure. I gave a couple of examples. And for example, what I'm asking people to do is to dig deep and come up with a story that they possibly have been kicking around for a while, and to do so in 6 words or less. And for example, one of the examples I gave was Frog DNA Ruins Billionaire's Theme Park. The story there would be Jurassic Park. So try to come up with a shortened version of a story that you would like to have people read, and perhaps you'd like to write. And if you use your email here, I'm considering all of these, and I'll pick one who will receive an autographed hard copy of the latest in the Bobby Holmes series, Monster on the Moors. And Stephanie, you guys will be able to give me a copy of these.
Yes, we will have, and everyone here today will get a copy of this event and the chat,
Super.
so they can take more notes.
Some great ideas. Some great,
Really great idea.
I hope you all get an opportunity to turn these into a novel. Take your time and sit down and start writing. Okay, a couple more minutes we'll spend on this.
I'm loving it.
What do we say? 2 more minutes.
So, we had a question. That's for the Q&A. Okay, we'll wait on that.
Okay, I would say that if you didn't get an opportunity, or perhaps you get a little brain freeze and it's difficult to come up with something like this on the fly, take your time, think about it, and send it to me via email, and I'm happy to consider it along with the others. You will be provided with my contact information, so you should be able to do that. I will say, I think the next aspect of the program here is for audience Q&A, and you can continue put some ideas up, but also let's engage in some questions here if the audience has any.
So I have a question for some of the people that have put something up. If you put your 6 words there, 5 words there, and you start writing from that, and it doesn't take you where you get frustrated, does it mean that you haven't synthesized your story into a tough enough angle to go after, and you go back and you change and you go back to those words, or do you write it first and then go back and change it?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Well, I think this goes back to, well, how do I write a story? Or how do I discipline myself to write? And again, for me, I know there are writers that create a whole storyboard and they know where their story is going to begin and they know where it's going to end. And the creativity comes with getting there from point A to point B. For me, I really don't know that. I start at the beginning and I do let my characters take me where they want me to go. I know that sounds very strange, but it really is how I operate. And I know there are authors that write that way. I don't have a fully formed storyline in place. I really don't know where it's going to end or how it's going to end or what's going to happen in between sometimes. There are times, especially with Monster on the Moors, there is a strange character in the middle or the beginning of the story, they don't know who he is. And I'm not talking about the beggar that I mentioned earlier, but he's a mysterious stranger at the center of this story. And they really don't know his background. I didn't know his background either initially, but in writing the story, I would pause and then do some research on the history of the area. And I found something that clicked, that made so much sense to me. And it put the story in a whole different direction, that I was able to use actual British history to influence my writing of this character and this story. So not fully fleshed out, but I was able to do that as I went along.
And then would you have gone back after you saw that and you wrote that? If you went back and looked at your 5 words, would they be totally different?
Probably. That's a good question. And the answer is probably, because initially you have a thought in your head and, about a story, but it doesn't tell you everything, and it doesn't give you all those details that we mentioned in those slides in order to give your story some meat on its bones. And so, yes, it probably would look different.
Got it.
That's a good point.
Awesome.
Okay, so we have some questions. Should I take them, or are you going to read them, or how do we?
I'll read them to you. So we have Cynthia asks, do you have writer's block? And she's writing an adult book and over a long period of time, and has had a lot of writer's block. So
yeah, it's tough to not have writer's block, I think, especially if you feel passionately about what it is you're writing. So don't beat yourself up over this. It happens. Go for a walk, ride a bike, go read a book, take some time away from it, and then come back to it and see if that helps. Think about your characters and what's important to them, and where do they want to go with this, and that might be helpful to you. But I think every writer has at some point writer's block, and not just as an entity between stories, but in a particular story, and perhaps in several points of a story. You're rolling along, and then all of a sudden, well, wait a minute, where do we go? Personally, I look at some research that might be helpful to me, as it was in this particular novel.
That gave more substance to what you started with.
Some more information, more substance, that I'm wrestling with now with the 3rd book in this series. I'm looking at the indigenous people of New Zealand and what that culture and history has to offer the story. And that's been pretty helpful, actually. So.
Awesome. So we have a question. What is the difference for you between writing fiction and nonfiction?
Fiction is, or nonfiction rather, to me, is harder because you can't fool your audience. Truth is truth. And if you're writing about something that's nonfiction in nature, then you need to make some sense out of it, and it has to make sense to a large number of people. And it should be based on some fact or experience. Fiction is just fun because you're making it up as you go along. Now, in this story that I have, there are some historical issues that come into play. There's some real British history and some British lore, British fable that I work into the story. But it's still fiction. It's a real place, but not a real thing that happens. So that's kind of fun to be able to create that and play with that and see where it goes.
How do you find an experience or a balance between when you have a total opinion about something as opposed to the character's opinion of it, or would the character end up having your opinion?
I tend to lean towards the character unless I can prove it otherwise. Unless there's something that really needs to be part of the story that might have a bent here. I know in my head, as I'm writing, I'm thinking, well, this character might be moving in this direction or say something or whatever. But if I do some research, like I did with this gentleman that I just mentioned to you, that has a direct impact on who he is and why he's there, well, that might move me in a different direction, and I'll go with that.
And have you ever changed your opinion about something in life from what the characters led you to?
No, I don't think so. If it were nonfiction, maybe, but not stuff that's made up. No.
Got it. Okay. We have a question. Someone said, this is amazing, wonderful information. And they wanted to know, what technology do you use to write with? Scrivener or Word or something else?
Just Word. I just sit at my computer and I just start banging it out and see where it goes. I don't use a particular format, a particular a program that you mentioned, like Scrivener. It's my kids would call me ancient, and they just don't get it. But a lot of that stuff just seems like extra work for me. So I'll sit there with my laptop on a Word doc and just plug away.
Awesome. How long did it take to edit and publish your books is another question.
Oh, that's an excellent question. I started writing this story, The Lost Treasure, which was my first novel, 13 years ago. And I've written 2 other novels since, and have started 2 others. I have actually 3 in various stages of development. But it has taken me 13 years to land a publisher, a traditional publisher, what might be referred to as a traditional publisher. And that was just last year. And that was through an author friend who recommended me. And I was very fortunate. He published both copies, or both in the series, the Bobby Holmes series, both novels, and with a promise to look at the 3rd.
Awesome.
But that's a whole different discussion in terms of how to get published and the business side of it. But it takes a long time. You can't really, and I'll say this about that, you can't really write to get published. You can't write to get famous. You can't write to get rich. A lot of the marketing, even in New York Times bestseller authors, a lot of the marketing is on your shoulders, getting the word out about your work. And it's just a very difficult procedure. So you have to write because you're passionate about it, because your story is coming out and being demanded to be told.
And then the business side is a later thing that you just put a different hat on for that.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, awesome. We have a question from Sheila. Why did you decide to write for a middle grade young adults audience? I
was a middle school teacher for 19 years. And I was a principal of a K to 8 school. And then opened up a school that was just grades 4 and 5. And stayed there for 12 years to the end of my educational career. So I know the age well. I've always loved middle school. When I first started teaching in middle school, with my degree from the then Jersey City State College, now NJCU, I was told that you're either going to love middle school or you're going to hate it. There's no middle ground in middle school. And I found that to be true, and I just happened to fall on the side of loving it. It's a great age group. You can reach them. You can just feed off of their excitement and imagination as a teacher, and it's just a great age group. So I wanted to direct my novel in that direction. Now, I will say also that I've heard from a number of high school level kids and adults who have read the novels that said, these are very nostalgic. I love it. I love the storyline. I love the characters. And I love the fact that you didn't dumb it down.
Right.
When I started writing these, I didn't want to use vocabulary. And I'd said this to my editor. Word choice is important. And I will go back and I'll review some of the word choices that I've made. But I really don't want to say something simple as opposed to challenging, because simple is what I should be doing to sell the book or whatever. I want to make it a good read for anyone who picks it up. So I think that's what I've done.
That's awesome. Awesome. Would you ever write something for young kids?
I haven't really thought about that, to be honest. I've got so many novel ideas in my head that I really haven't thought about a lower grade level.
Right, right. And you've written some adult nonfiction.
Yeah, the adult nonfiction, Tommy Ailes, Good for What Ails You, is about a sleazy attorney in Sarasota who lives in his mother's basement with his challenging cousin for a roommate, and they get embroiled with the head of in a court case. He gets the short straw and gets mixed up with the head of the Florida Mafia, a Colombian drug lord accused of, or a Colombian drug lord turned movie mogul, and a socialite accused of killing her husband, all to the backdrop of the Sarasota Film Festival. So it's a complex thing going on there, and it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Awesome. I'm wondering if we have any other questions. Yes.
See, and I agree. I love teaching middle school too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a great age.
We have a question on the business side is, how do you pick an editor?
Good question, because that's not easy to do sometimes. I subscribe to Writers Magazine, and I looked for editors that would advertise in that magazine, and then I call them up and interview them. I try to go on the basis of recommendations. I started on this path, actually, being in Sarasota. We have a house there, and was spending time there. And I wanted to, this is probably the year before I retired, I wanted to start writing, and I looked at, or my wife came across a woman who was giving classes on writing, who was a writer herself. And I called her up and I said, I'm not going to be here for your classes. Is there any way we can work this out online? So we met and talked about it, and she was amenable, and she created these lessons that every week she would give me her lesson, and I would send her my work, and she would review it, and we'd meet the following week and do the same thing in a different aspect of writing. And that really sparked my interest greatly in moving ahead with my story and becoming a better writer. And I will say that hiring an editor is an important thing to do, because it made me a better writer. Mm-hmm. And I think they can do that for just about anyone.
Awesome. We have a question. What ails you is nonfiction. No, it's fiction.
It's fiction.
It's
yes.
Fiction.
Oh yeah. That description, it has to be fiction.
Awesome.
Yeah. My nonfiction book, In Search of Leadership. It's a very small book, very small novel, based on an experience that I had a year before I retired with one of the world's renowned educators, Roland Barthes. Started the Harvard Principal Center. He's a brilliant guy, and got a grant, the Dodge grant, to go meet with him and sail on his boat, just he and I, along the Maine coast. And I got to pick his brain, just sit there for an overnight, and we fished and talked, and I talked to him about everything educational that I could think of. And he was one of my professional heroes, and I got to sit there and just, as we sailed, and just talked. And the result of that was this book on leadership that we came up with on the way home, actually, on the plane, I was jotting down notes about lessons that I learned sailing and how they apply to the workplace.
Wow. We're going to bring you back to kind of talk about that too in the leadership format. So it's awesome. We have another question. What is your favorite book or author and influences?
Oh, some of my favorite books. Stephen King, he's a master. I have a couple of his books that I think are just the best ever. The Shining being one, Salem's Lot is another. There's an author, Justin Cronin, who wrote a trilogy called The Passage. Love that book. The Strain by Guillermo del Toro. Love that book. These are all horror novels, but horror authors. But I also love other kinds of novels. Nelson DeMille is a favorite author of mine. John Irving, I love his stuff. So to read as much as you possibly can, even in genres that are not the one that you might be most excited about, I think is important because you get to read good writing.
Right. And someone else is asking if you have favorite young adult authors.
Joseph Delaney has an Apprentice series. I loved his stuff. Let's see, Neil Gaiman. I always mess up his name. I think it's Gaiman. He has one called The Cemetery Book, I think is the title. And I love that one. So those are just a couple.
Awesome. We have a question. As a young man, did you always know that you would write novels someday?
No, I didn't even know that I was stimulating my imagination, but I was outside playing a lot as a kid growing up. And believe it or not, I'm one of 10 in my family. So to get out from being underfoot, I got to go to the movies on a Saturday and see a matinee, a double feature, usually horror flicks, the 1950s, and that really got me going. So I've always been a fan of horror, and
That's awesome. That's awesome. So do you want to tell people how they can order your books? I know one person's going to win one, but for everyone else, we'd love to get the books.
certainly, and this information I think is part of the information you'll be sending out to people.
Yeah.
My website is jmkellyauthor.com, and you have my email as well. They can be found on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and a number of other sites. So yeah, if you go to my website, there's a link right to the book. I also put out a newsletter each month, and you can sign up for that for some further information like this, for example. That might be helpful if you're interested in them on Instagram and Facebook as well.
Awesome.
Would you like me to talk about the takeaway assignment at this point, or?
Yes, I would.
Okay, we do have a takeaway assignment for the audience, and I think it's something you might enjoy, especially if you've gotten into the idea of creative writing here. What I would like you to do is to come up with the first line of your story. If you remember, for my book, that I tried to give a sense of foreboding, a mood, set a tone. Here's the first line of my story, and I spent a lot of time on this. The wind stroked his matted fur, tugging at him with probing fingers as he raced across the dampened field. It gives you a sense of mood. It gives you a sense of place. It gives you a sense of something ominous is about to happen. And it took some time to write that. So I would like you to give it some thought. You've come up with a storyline in your 6 words or less. How about a sentence? Your first sentence to your story. Send them to me. Email them to me at jmkellyauthor
At Gmail.
@gmail.com. Thank you. And I promise you that A, I will respond to each and every one of them. B, everyone who sends me one of these will get a free ebook copy. It's either EPUB or Mobi, whichever format is best suits you. You let me know. And I, again, will select one for an autographed copy of Monster on the Moors. I'll be happy to do that. So just to recap very briefly, send me via your email your sentence, your choice of ebook, and also any questions that you might have. If you have some question that wasn't answered today or you think of it later, I'm happy to respond to that.
Thank you so much, Jim. You're amazing. We're going to have you back for many things. And I also want to thank our team, Anna Carhart, our theater manager, Sabrina Sabalo, our box office and technical Zoom manager, and Justin Tinker, our technical director, for all of your help on this. Please check out njcu.edu/arts. We have another afternoon on the 27th of June with baseball writers. So please sign up for that and visit us often. And yeah, and the art for Jim's books are on your screen right now. So
fantastic. Thank you very much, Stephanie. It's been a pleasure and I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thank you.